Pretend to be my wife at Christmas, the millionaire said. Then let the bride choose her own pace. Snow drifted slowly outside the tall windows of the hotel lobby, soft and quiet, like the city was holding its breath. Ethan Caldwell stood still near the entrance, his coat unbuttoned, his phone dark in his hand. Pretend to be my wife at Christmas, he said calmly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Clara Bennett looked at him, stunned, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. There was no pressure in his tone, no urgency, no demand, just an offer, placed gently between them, as if he was fully prepared for her to say no. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her worn handbag as the holiday lights reflected in her eyes. Outside, the snow kept falling, and in that quiet moment, something irreversible began to take shape. What was going to happen to them? Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Ethan Caldwell was not a man who asked lightly. As the founder of a private investment firm built on generations of quiet influence, he was used to conversations that came with expectations attached. This one did not. He stood across from Clara Bennett in the softly lit lobby, the hum of Christmas music barely audible beneath the sound of footsteps and distant laughter. She looked out of place beside him, not because of her clothes, but because she carried herself like someone braced for impact. I'm not asking you to lie forever, Ethan said, his voice steady. Only for the season. Clara searched his face, looking for the hidden cost. She had learned to do that a long time ago. People rarely offered anything without taking something in return. And after Christmas? She asked. Ethan did not hesitate. After Christmas, you leave. No explanation. No obligation. The clarity unsettled her more than a demand would have. He explained the situation simply. A family expectation. A series of formal events. Appearances that mattered more than truth. He did not mention loneliness. He did not mention exhaustion. He only spoke about logistics. There will be an agreement, he continued. It will be written. You will have an exit clause. If you change your mind at any point, you walk away. Clara nodded slowly, her heart pounding. She had been running for months. From conversations. From questions. From places where people expected her to be someone she could no longer maintain. A temporary role. A clear boundary. A defined end. It was not safety, but it was close enough to rest. Why me? She asked quietly. Ethan met her gaze. Because you look like someone who needed quiet. And because I will not ask you to give me more than you choose. The words settled between them, heavy and unfamiliar. Later that evening, Clara sat alone in the guest room he had arranged, staring at the small Christmas tree placed by the window. No one had followed her. No one had checked on her. No one had asked for reassurance. For the first time in weeks, she exhaled fully. Down the hall, Ethan stood in his own room, staring at the city lights, aware that he had crossed a line that could not be undone. Neither of them knew it yet, but the most difficult part of the arrangement was not pretending. It was what would happen if one of them started to heal. The agreement was signed the next morning, printed on thick paper, and written in language that felt unusually careful. Ethan Caldwell read each line aloud, not because Clara Bennett needed the explanation, but because he wanted to make sure there were no hidden corners. Temporary arrangement. Public appearances only. Separate rooms. No personal obligations. A clear end date. And one final clause that made Clara pause. She may leave at any time, without reason or consequence. Ethan looked up from the document. That part matters, he said quietly. Clara nodded and signed her name. The pen did not shake in her hand. They spent the day preparing in silence. Not the heavy silence she was used to, the kind that pressed down on her chest, but something lighter. Neutral. Safe enough to move inside. Ethan arranged the logistics himself. A simple ring. A schedule shared by email. A driver who asked. No questions. The staff was informed only of what they needed to know. There was no celebration. No announcement. That evening, they attended the first holiday, event together. The ballroom was warm, filled with soft music and a low murmur of conversation. Clara walked beside Ethan, her arm resting lightly against his sleeve, just enough to appear convincing. He did not tighten his grip. He did not guide her steps. He simply matched her pace. When introductions were made, he spoke for himself, never for her. "This is my wife, Clara," he said once calmly. Nothing more. People smiled. Compliments were offered. Questions hovered, then drifted away when they were not encouraged. Clara realized that Ethan had mastered a rare skill. He made boundaries look effortless. At one point, a woman leaned close and asked Clara how she was adjusting to married life. Clara felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Her mind searched for a response that would satisfy without revealing anything. Before she could speak, Ethan intervened gently. "She prefers quiet," he said, his tone warm but firm. "We both do." The woman laughed softly and moved on. Clara glanced at him, surprised. He did not look back. He did not wait for gratitude. Later, as the evening thinned and the guests began to leave, Clara stepped outside onto the terrace. The cold air stung her cheeks, sharp and clean. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and stared at the city below. Ethan joined her a moment later, standing at a respectful distance. "You did well," he said. "I did nothing," she replied. "That is exactly what I mean." They stood there for a while without speaking. Snow had begun to fall again, light and steady. Clara noticed how her shoulders had dropped, how her breathing had slowed. When they returned to the car, Ethan opened the door for her, then stepped back. No lingering touch, no expectation. At the house, they went their separate ways. Clara sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, still wearing the ring. She turned it once, then twice, then stopped. It did not feel heavy. It felt temporary, honest. Down the hall, Ethan loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of water. He did not replay the evening with satisfaction. Instead, he felt a quiet unease. He had expected the arrangement to be simple, functional. What he had not expected was the way her silence had settled into the spaces of his home without disrupting anything. It made him aware of how loud everything else usually was. In her room, Clara lay back and stared at the ceiling. No one knocked. No one checked in. No one asked if she was all right. The absence of demand felt unfamiliar, almost disorienting. She closed her eyes and let herself rest. Neither of them realized it yet, but something subtle had shifted that night. Not attraction, not love, permission. And that quiet permission would soon begin to test the limits of the agreement they both believed they controlled. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm neither of them had planned. Mornings began without urgency. Clara Bennett woke to soft light filtering through the curtains and the distant sound of the house coming alive. No footsteps paused outside her door. No messages waited on her phone asking where she would be or who she would become that day. She moved through the kitchen slowly, making tea, standing by the window as snow gathered along the edge of the garden. The house felt large but not empty, present but not demanding. Ethan Caldwell appeared most mornings a few minutes later, already dressed, his movements efficient but unhurried. They exchanged brief greetings. Nothing more was required. He never asked what she planned to do with her day. When she chose to stay inside, no one questioned it. When she left to walk through the neighborhood or sit alone in a cafe, the driver waited at a distance and never checked the time. The arrangement was holding, and in the stillness, something unfamiliar began to happen. Clara noticed her hands no longer trembled when she poured coffee. She noticed she could sit with her thoughts without bracing for impact. Silence, once something she used to survive, had become something she could inhabit. One afternoon, Ethan returned earlier than expected. Clara was in the living room, curled into one corner of the sofa with a book she had not turned a page of in several minutes. He paused when he saw her, then stepped back slightly, giving her space. "I did not mean to interrupt," he said. "You are not," she replied. He nodded once and took a seat across the room, far enough that she did not feel watched. Papers rested on his lap, but he did not open them. The fireplace crackled softly between them. They sat like that for a long time. No conversation, no explanations, Clara realized something then that caught her off guard. He was not waiting for her to speak. Most people did. They hovered in silence, pressing gently until words spilled out. Ethan did not. When she finally looked up, their eyes met briefly. There was no question in his gaze, only acknowledgement. That evening, they attended another event. Smaller, quieter, a dinner hosted by a family friend. At the table, conversations flowed around them. When Clara withdrew into herself, Ethan did not fill the space. When someone addressed her directly, he did not answer for her. At one point, a guest laughed and said, "You are very quiet for someone so newly married." The room stilled for a moment. Clara felt the familiar, tightening return, sharp and sudden. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Ethan placed his napkin down carefully. "She speaks when she chooses," he said evenly. "So do I." The conversation moved on. Later, in the car, Clara stared out the window as the city lights blurred past. "You did not have to say that," she said. "I know," Ethan replied. "I wanted to." She considered that, not as a gesture of protection, but as a statement of fact. Back at the house, Clara stopped him in the hallway. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Being careful, being considerate." Ethan took a moment before answering. "Because I have learned that silence is not something to fix," he said. "Sometimes it is something to respect." She nodded slowly, absorbing the words without committing to them. That night, Clara slept without dreaming. Ethan, awake in his own room, stared at the ceiling and felt a shift he could not quite name. The arrangement was working too well. Not because it was convincing, but because it required him to step back in ways he had never practiced before. For the first time, he was not managing an outcome. He was allowing space. Neither of them spoke about it. But as the days continued, it became clear that the quiet they shared was no longer empty. It was becoming a place where something fragile could exist without being questioned, and that quiet, unspoken understanding would soon be tested in ways neither of them had anticipated. The shift came quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Clara Bennett realized it one afternoon while standing in the hallway, listening to a conversation she was not meant to hear. Ethan Caldwell's voice carried from his office, calm and controlled, speaking to someone on the phone. "No," he said evenly. "That schedule does not work." There was a pause. "She will not attend 3 events in one day," he continued. "We agreed to 2. That has not changed." Another pause. Then, softer but firm. "No explanations are required." Clara stepped back before she could hear more. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something else. Recognition. That evening, the change became clearer. The calendar on the kitchen counter had been updated. Several invitations were gone. Others had been shortened. The longest event of the week had been quietly removed altogether. Clara did not ask why. At dinner, Ethan spoke casually, as if nothing had shifted. "I moved a few things," he said. "If any of it does not work for you, let me know." "For me?" she asked. "Yes." He did not elaborate. He did not explain himself. He returned to his meal, giving her the space to respond or not. She nodded once and continued eating. The next event took place 2 days later, a small holiday fundraiser held in a restored townhouse. The rooms were crowded but subdued, decorated with greenery and soft lights. Clara moved through the space slowly, her hand resting lightly against Ethan's arm. As conversations formed and dissolved around them, she noticed something unusual. No one pressed her for details. No one questioned her role. People greeted her politely, then directed their attention elsewhere. She realized Ethan had prepared them, not with instructions, with tone. When a man approached and began asking pointed questions about her background, Ethan did not interrupt immediately. He waited, watching Clara's expression. Clara felt the familiar pressure rise. She considered answering. She considered deflecting. She chose neither. "I prefer not to talk about myself tonight," she said quietly. The man blinked, surprised, then smiled and stepped back. Ethan said nothing. Later, as they stood near the window overlooking the street, Clara spoke without turning toward him. "You did that," she said. Ethan followed her gaze, not pretending confusion. "I removed the pressure," he replied. "The choice was still yours." That distinction mattered more than she expected. In the days that followed, the the pattern continued. A driver who arrived early so she would not feel rushed. A room arranged with fewer people, fewer questions. An assistant who addressed Clara directly instead of speaking around her. No one announced these changes. No one sought credit. One afternoon, Clara returned from a walk to find a note on the kitchen counter. I will be home late tonight. Do not wait. She stared at the simple handwriting longer than necessary. He was not checking on her. He was informing her. That evening, Clara made dinner for herself and ate in silence. She did not feel abandoned. She felt trusted. When Ethan returned, he found her in the living room, reading. I canceled the final event before Christmas, he said. She looked up. Why? It was unnecessary, he replied, and it did not feel worth the cost. She considered him carefully. What cost? Ethan paused. Your peace. The words settled between them. Clara lowered her book. You did not have to do that. I know, he said. There was no expectation in his voice. No unspoken debt. Later that night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She realized that something fundamental had shifted. Not the arrangement. Not the timeline. The power dynamic. She was not being managed. She was being considered. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that consideration did not feel like a transaction. It felt like respect. Clara did not say thank you. She did not need to. But as she drifted towards sleep, a thought surfaced that unsettled her more than any demand ever had. If this was possible without being asked for anything in return, what would happen when the arrangement ended? And whether she was ready or not, that question was beginning to take shape. The tension did not arrive as conflict. It arrived as awareness. Clara Bennett noticed it first in the mornings, when she no longer startled at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. She noticed it in the way she moved through the house without rehearsing explanations in her head. The quiet had stopped being a shelter and had begun to feel like a choice. That realization unsettled her. One afternoon, while Ethan Caldwell was away, Clara stood in front of the small calendar pinned near the kitchen. Only a few days remained before Christmas. Only a few events left on the schedule. The end date, written in Ethan's neat handwriting, waited at the bottom of the page. She traced the date with her finger, then stepped back. When Ethan returned that evening, he found her standing by the window. The lights of the street reflected faintly across the glass. You are quiet, he said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. I am thinking, Clara replied. He nodded and gave her space, removing his coat and setting it aside. He did not ask what she was thinking about. They shared dinner in silence. Halfway through the meal, Clara set her fork down. When this ends, she said, will you regret it? Ethan looked up slowly. He did not answer right away. No, he said finally. I would regret holding on longer than agreed. The words landed gently but firmly. She studied his face, searching for something familiar. Control. Expectation. A hidden request. There was none. I'm not asking you to stay, he continued. And I will not be disappointed if you leave. That honesty was more difficult to accept than pressure would have been. A few days later, they attended the final event before Christmas Eve. The room was quieter than the others had been, filled with people who knew Ethan well enough to notice the changes in him. As they moved through the evening, Clara felt eyes linger. Not curious, observant. At one point, Ethan was drawn into conversation across the room. Clara found herself alone near a table set with candles and winter flowers. A woman approached her, older, composed, her gaze direct but not unkind. You seem different, the woman said. Clara did not answer immediately. Different how? She asked. Unburdened, the woman replied. Most people in your position carry themselves like they are performing. Clara considered that. I'm not performing, she said. The woman smiled softly and moved on. When Ethan returned, he noticed a shift in Clara's posture. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, she said. I think so. On the drive home, the city passed quietly outside the window. Clara watched the lights blur and felt a strange mixture of calm and unease. At the house, she stopped near the staircase. I will be leaving soon, she said. Ethan inclined his head slightly. I know. I do not know what comes next, she added. That is not something you owe me, he replied. The absence of resistance felt like standing at the edge of something vast. That night, Clara packed slowly. Not because she was ready to go, but because the act of packing helped her think. Each folded item felt like a decision reclaimed. Down the hall, Ethan sat in his office, reviewing documents he could not focus on. He was aware, with uncomfortable clarity, that the balance he had worked so carefully to maintain was shifting. He had believed distance would protect them both. Now he understood that distance also carried a cost. On Christmas Eve morning, Clara appeared in the doorway of his office. "I wanted to tell you," she said, "that this was enough." He looked up. "Enough?" "Yes," she replied. "To rest. To remember myself." Ethan stood. Then it served its purpose. She hesitated. And if it had not ended yet, he met her gaze. "Then I would still let you choose." That was the moment everything crystallized. Not love, not longing, but clarity. Clara nodded and stepped back into the hallway, her heart steady, her path uncertain but hers. Ethan remained where he was, aware that the final days of the arrangement would test not their agreement, but their restraint. And in that quiet space between holding on and letting go, the true weight of the choice ahead began to settle in. Christmas Day arrived quietly. There were no guests, no schedule, no expectation of performance. The house felt different that morning, softened by the absence of obligation. Clara Bennett woke later than usual and lay still for a moment, listening. There was no movement in the hallway. No distant conversation. Only the muted hush of winter outside. When she stepped into the kitchen, she found a simple note on the counter. "I will be in the study this morning. Please take the day as you wish." No signature was needed. Clara made coffee and carried the mug to the window. Snow rested along the fence and the branches of the trees beyond it. The world felt paused, as if giving permission for nothing to happen. She spent the morning reading, then walking through the garden, wrapped in a coat that smelled faintly of cedar. No one checked the time. No one reminded her of the date. By afternoon, she realized something that made her stop mid-step. She was not counting the hours until she left. That unsettled her. In the study, Ethan Caldwell worked with the door slightly ajar. He kept his focus on the papers in front of him, though his attention drifted more often than he liked. He was aware of the space Clara occupied in the house, not as a presence he needed to manage, but as one he was careful not to disturb. He told himself that this was what respect looked like. Late in the afternoon, Clara knocked softly on the open door. "I'm going out," she said. "Just for a walk." Ethan looked up. "Do you want the driver?" She shook her head. "No, I would like to go alone." "Of course," he replied. She hesitated, then added, "I will be back before dark." "I will be here," he said, without emphasis. The walk took her through quiet streets decorated with lights that glowed gently against the snow. Families passed by. Laughter carried faintly through open doors. Clara felt the familiar tug of comparison, then watched it pass. She was not missing anything. When she returned, dusk had settled. The house lights were on, warm and steady. Ethan was in the living room, sitting near the tree with a book resting unopened in his hands. "I made soup," he said. "If you are hungry." She smiled faintly. "Thank you." They ate together without ceremony. No toasts, no shared memory of past holidays. Only the present, simple and unclaimed. Afterward, Clara sat on the floor near the tree, absently adjusting one of the ornaments. Ethan watched her from a distance, careful not to intrude. "I will be leaving tomorrow," she said, her voice steady. Ethan nodded once. "I know. You do not ask why," she observed. "That is not my place," he replied. She considered him for a long moment. "Most people would ask. Most people would want an answer that benefits them," he said. "I do not." The truth of that settled slowly. That night, Clara packed the last of her things. She moved deliberately, not hurried, not reluctant. When she finished, she sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence surround her. She felt healed enough to choose, and that mattered more than certainty. Downstairs, Ethan stood by the window, watching the snow fall again. He felt the pull to say something, to offer more time, to suggest a different arrangement. He did not, because restraint, he had learned, was also a form of care. The next morning, Clara descended the stairs with her bag in hand. Ethan waited near the door, coat on, keys resting on the table. "I can arrange transportation," he said. "I will take a cab," she replied. He nodded. "If you need anything," she raised a hand gently. "I know." They stood there, neither moving closer. "This was not a rescue," Clara said quietly. "I know," Ethan answered. "It was a place to rest." "Yes." She stepped forward, then stopped. For a moment, it seemed as though she might say something more. Instead, she offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for not asking me to stay," she said. Ethan met her gaze. "Thank you for choosing when to leave." She turned and walked out into the cold air, her steps steady. Ethan closed the door behind her and stood still, aware that the arrangement had ended exactly as promised. What remained was something else entirely, and he did not yet know what shape it would take. The house felt larger after Clara Bennett left. Ethan Caldwell noticed it immediately, not as emptiness, but as an absence of tension. The rooms remained exactly as they had been. Nothing was missing. Nothing felt disrupted. And, yet, something essential had shifted. He moved through the day with deliberate care. Meetings were handled. Calls were returned. Decisions were made with the same precision he had always relied on. But beneath the structure, there was a quiet awareness that refused to settle. He had kept his word. He had let her go, and that was precisely why it lingered. Across the city, Clara stepped into a small apartment she had arranged weeks earlier, a place chosen for its simplicity rather than comfort. The cab pulled away, and the sound of traffic filled the space around her. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, her bag still in her hand. The silence here was different. Not threatening, not heavy, but unfamiliar. She unpacked slowly, setting each item in its place as if relearning the shape of her own life. There were no rules posted on the wall, no agreements to remember, only time stretching forward without structure. That first night, she slept lightly, not from fear, but from awareness. She woke before dawn and lay still listening to the city breathe. She was free. That truth settled into her chest with both relief and weight. Days passed. Clara returned to routines she had once abandoned. Walking to the market, sitting alone in cafes, writing again, though she did not yet know what for. Each choice felt deliberate, earned, and in the quiet moments, she noticed something else. She missed the absence of pressure. Not Ethan, not the house, but the way nothing had been required of her there. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself slowing down in unexpected ways. He no longer filled the evenings with work. He read without distraction. He cooked meals he did not need to rush through. The restraint he had practiced for Clara had not disappeared with her departure. It had remained, reshaping his habits. One evening, he found a contract file still sitting on his desk. He opened it, scanning the familiar language. Temporary arrangement. Clear end date. No obligations beyond appearance. Everything had gone exactly as written. He closed the folder and set it aside. The success of the arrangement did not feel like success. A week after Christmas, Clara received a message. Not from Ethan, from the assistant who had coordinated the events. A brief note. No expectations attached. Just an acknowledgement that the arrangement had concluded cleanly, and that Clara would not be contacted again unless she wished it. She stared at the message for a long time. The door remained open. That choice stayed with her throughout the day. She went about her errands with care, noticing the way she carried herself now. Straighter, more present, less guarded. The healing had not erased her past, but it had given her space to stand within it. That evening, she sat at her small table and wrote a single sentence in her notebook. "I'm allowed to choose without explaining." She closed the notebook and leaned back, breathing deeply. Across the city, Ethan stood on his balcony, the winter air sharp against his face. He considered reaching out, not to ask her to return, not to renegotiate, only to acknowledge what had passed between them. He did not yet, because the most important part of what they had built was not contact. It was consent, and that required patience. Neither of them knew where the path would lead next. There were no promises waiting at the end of the road, no certainty to lean on, but there was something quieter, something steadier. They had both learned how to live without being claimed. And in that shared understanding, the possibility of choosing each other freely had finally become real. The question was no longer whether they could stay. It was whether they would choose to return. And that answer, still unwritten, waited just beyond the silence. Healing did not arrive all at once. It revealed itself in quiet confirmations. For Clara Bennett, it appeared in the smallest moments. In the way she woke without bracing herself. In the way she moved through the city without scanning faces for threat or expectation. In the way silence no longer felt like something she had to endure. Weeks had passed since Christmas. Winter lingered, but the sharpness had softened. She sat in a small cafe near her apartment, a place she had chosen because no one hurried her. The notebook lay open on the table, pages no longer blank. She had begun writing again, not with urgency, but with patience. Each sentence felt earned. Across the room, laughter rose and faded. Clara did not shrink from it. She did not need to disappear to feel safe. That realization startled her. Healing, she understood, was not forgetting. It was standing where she was without fear of being taken. Later that afternoon, she walked past a familiar building without stopping. A few weeks earlier, she might have turned back, drawn by memory or doubt. Today, she continued forward. The choice felt natural. Ethan Caldwell experienced his own recognition differently. It came one evening as he reviewed a proposal he would have approved without hesitation before. He read it carefully, then set it aside. The pace felt wrong, the pressure unnecessary. He closed the file. The restraint he had practiced for Clara had become something he practiced for himself. He was no longer interested in outcomes that required force. That night, he found himself standing in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal. The house no longer felt empty. It felt settled, as if it had learned a quieter rhythm. He thought of Clara then, not with urgency or regret, but with clarity. She had not needed him to change her. She had needed him not to interfere. And in that space, she had healed herself. The understanding humbled him. A few days later, Clara received an invitation, not a request, not an expectation. A handwritten note had been slipped under her door. No return address, no signature. It read only, "If you'd like to talk, the choice is yours." No explanation required. Clara sat on the floor, the note resting in her open palm. She did not feel startled. She did not feel pressured. She felt calm. She folded the note carefully and placed it inside her notebook. She did not decide immediately, because she no longer had to. That evening, she walked through the park as dusk settled, the sky pale and open above her. She considered the past weeks, the distance she had traveled without leaving the city. She had learned something essential. Healing was not about staying or leaving. It was about knowing she could choose either without losing herself. At home, she stood by the window and looked out at the street below. Lights flickered on. People passed, absorbed in their own lives. She picked up her phone, then set it down again. Not yet. Across the city, Ethan stood in his office, the note he had written absent from his thoughts now. He did not wait for a response. He had not checked the time. He trusted the silence. Days passed. Clara continued to live fully within her own pace. Ethan continued to practice restraint without effort. When a message finally came, it was simple. "I am well. I would like to meet. Not to return, just to speak." Ethan read it once, then again. "Of course," he replied, "when and where feels right to you." No questions followed. Clara smiled faintly as she read the response. Not because of relief, because of recognition. The healing had not ended the story. It had prepared them to continue without fear. Whatever came next would not be built on obligation, or rescue, or silence forced to endure. It would be built on two people who had learned how to stand on their own. And that, Clara realized as she closed her notebook for the night, was the most honest beginning either of them had ever known. They met on a quiet afternoon, weeks after the last snow had melted. Clara Bennett arrived first, choosing a small cafe near the river, a place where the light came in slowly through wide windows. She sat near the back, her coat folded neatly. Beside her, her posture relaxed. She was not waiting with expectation. She was simply present. When Ethan Caldwell entered, he spotted her immediately, not because she stood out, but because she no longer disappeared into the space around her. He approached at an unhurried pace, and stopped a few steps away. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "Thank you for asking without pressure," Clara replied. They sat across from each other, the table between them modest and unclaimed. No one spoke at first. The silence felt familiar now, not fragile, not tense. Clara broke it gently. "I wanted to see you because I am well." Ethan nodded. "I can see that." She smiled faintly. "I needed to say it aloud. To myself, as much as to you." "I understand," he said. They spoke then, carefully about small things. The weeks that had passed, the routines they had built separately, the ways their lives had shifted without announcement. Ethan did not ask her to come back. Clara did not offer to stay longer. That was the point. "I want to be clear," Clara said eventually. "What we shared mattered, but it mattered because it ended when it should have." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "I agree. I did not heal because someone held on to me," she continued. "I heal because no one did." He considered that. It was not easy, he admitted. Letting go rarely is. She studied him for a moment. "You changed too." "Yes," he said simply. "I learned that control is not the same as care." The words settled between them, honest and complete. When they stood to leave, there was no awkwardness. No ruse. Outside, the river moved slowly beneath the bridge, steady and indifferent to their timing. Clara paused before turning away. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. Ethan nodded. "Neither am I." They walked in opposite directions at first, then stopped almost at the same moment. Clara turned back. "If we were to begin again," she said carefully, "it would have to be different." Ethan faced her fully. "It would not begin with an agreement." "No," she agreed. "It would begin with choice. And continue only if it remains one," he said. She smiled, this time without hesitation. "Then we are aligned." They exchanged contact information without ceremony. No promises followed. No expectations were attached. Just possibility. As Clara walked away, she felt no urgency to look back. She did not need reassurance. Whatever came next would be entered freely or not at all. Ethan watched her go, then turned toward the river, breathing in the cool air. He felt lighter than he had in years. Not because he had gained something, because he had learned when not to take. In the days that followed, they met again. Slowly, intentionally. Sometimes for coffee. Sometimes for a walk. Sometimes not at all. Each meeting was a decision renewed. There was no rescue. No obligation. No claim. Only two people who had learned, separately and together. That love does not begin with possession. It begins when safety is offered and freedom is honored. And in that quiet understanding, something lasting finally took root. Not because it was asked for, but because it was chosen.